Have you ever heard a story so buried in the red clay of the South that even the wind refuses to whisper its name? In the old cotton fields of Arkansas, where cries of the enslaved once echoed beneath the moon, there are tales that never made it to the history books. Stories too disturbing, too supernatural, too real to be dismissed as legend. Tonight we dig up one of those stories, one whispered about by generations, sealed in blood, and born in the sweltering heart of 1850. The air in 1850 Arkansas hung heavy with the scent of rain and raw cotton, the kind that clings to the throat and settles deep into the lungs. The plantations stretched wide and endless, a sea of white fields under the grey sky, and in that vast emptiness, the cries of the enslaved were carried like ghosts between the rows. Among them was Ruth, a woman whose silence spoke louder than any scream. She was known for her endurance, for working through pain that would have broken others, for moving through the world as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. Her pregnancy had been noticed by the other slaves, but no one dared ask her who the father was. Some said it was the overseer. Others whispered darker things, stories that were not meant for the ears of daylight. That night, the storm came without warning, tearing through the fields like a living thing. Thunder rolled over the land, and lightning flashed against the skeletal trees. The masters and their families locked themselves in their houses, while the slaves huddled in their cabins, praying under their breath. But Ruth was not among them. She had been seen walking into the fields, her swollen belly heavy beneath her torn dress, her bare feet sinking into the wet soil. The wind howled her name, or at least that's what the others claimed later when they tried to explain what they'd heard. Some said they saw her silhouette, illuminated by the lightning, standing near the cypress tree at the edge of the cotton rows, where the ground was said to be cursed. The cypress was old, older than the plantation itself, its roots reaching deep into the earth where the first bodies had been buried. No one went near it at night. The old ones said it marked the place where a woman had once been hung for witchcraft, and that the soil beneath it never forgot the taste of her blood. Yet that was where Ruth went, clutching her belly as the first scream tore through her throat. The storm swallowed the sound, and when the lightning struck again, she was on her knees, her hands buried in the mud, her face twisted in pain. Alone in that endless dark, she gave birth to her child as the sky split open above her. The rain fell hard and fast, washing away the blood before it could soak into the soil. The baby's cry rose above the thunder, shrill and piercing, and those who heard it swore it did not sound like the cry of any human child. Some said it echoed like two voices at once, one high and innocent, the other low and ancient. Ruth held the infant close, her body trembling, her eyes wide with something between fear and awe. The lightning illuminated her face again, and for a moment it was said that the baby's eyes gleamed like wet coal. The storm seemed to pause then, just for a breath, as if the world itself was listening. When morning came, Ruth was found collapsed beside the cypress, the baby wrapped in a strip of her torn dress. The overseer sent 2 men to fetch her, muttering curses under his breath about women giving birth in the fields like animals. But when they approached, the men stopped short. The ground around Ruth was scorched black, as if fire had licked the soil, though the rain had not yet stopped. They said the air smelled of iron and smoke, and the baby's skin was cold, though it breathed. Ruth did not speak when they brought her back to the quarters. Her eyes were unfocused, her lips moving without sound. She held the child so tightly that no one dared take it from her. Days passed, and Ruth's silence grew heavier. She did not eat, did not sleep, and the other slaves whispered that she spoke to something in the dark corner of her cabin. The baby never cried again after that first night, though sometimes, in the dead hours before dawn, those sleeping nearby would hear a soft humming sound, a lullaby they did not recognize. They said Ruth's shadow moved even when she sat still, and that the candlelight flickered whenever she held the child too close. The midwife, an old woman named Dinah who had seen more births than she could count, refused to enter Ruth's cabin after the 3rd night. She claimed the air was wrong inside, too cold, too still, as if the life within had been drained out and replaced with something that did not belong to this world. The master ordered Ruth back to the fields within a week, but she moved like a ghost among the cotton stalks. The others avoided her, not out of cruelty, but out of a fear they could not name. The birds no longer sang near the rows where she worked, and the cotton itself seemed duller. Its white turned ashen under the sun. Some nights the overseer would patrol the fields and see her standing still in the moonlight, whispering to the ground. He told himself it was grief that drove her, that she was just another broken woman clinging to her sanity. But even he began to notice that when she prayed, the wind went silent. No one could explain what happened the night the storm returned, the night the cries came again. They said the sky opened the same way it had before, and the thunder rolled across the land like the sound of chains being dragged through the heavens. Ruth was gone from her cabin, and by the time they found her, she was once again under the cypress tree, her arms empty, her eyes wide open, staring into the soil as if she could see through it. The baby was gone, no trace left, but a single small handprint pressed into the mud, the print already filling with rainwater as the storm raged on. No one spoke of it after that, but the field where Ruth had given birth was never the same. The cotton grew taller there, whiter, almost luminous beneath the moon, and when the wind blew across it at night, it carried a sound faint but unmistakable, the echo of a baby's cry, soft and hollow, as if calling from deep beneath the earth. They said Ruth was never seen the same after that night, that the storm had changed something in her eyes, something that made even the bravest men look away. The others noticed the way she began to wander into the fields at dusk, long after the day's labor had ended, her feet dragging through the wet cotton rows, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as if waiting for something that only she could see. The cypress tree where she had birthed her child became her altar, her refuge, and her confessional. She would kneel there for hours, whispering to the ground, her voice low and rhythmic, the kind of sound that felt less like prayer and more like conversation. Those who dared listen swore she wasn't speaking English or any language they knew. It was older, deeper, like the hum of the earth itself speaking through her throat. One night, an old man named Jonah followed her. He had lost his son to the whip years before and had nothing left to fear. The moon was thin and pale, barely a sliver, and the mist rolled across the fields like breath from the graves. Jonah crouched behind a fallen fence post, watching Ruth through the fog. She stood before the cypress tree, holding something wrapped in cloth, the baby, or what remained of it. The air around her shimmered, and though the wind was still, the branches of the tree swayed as if responding to her voice. Jonah said later, in a whisper that trembled from his lips, that he saw the earth move. The soil itself seemed to pulse, rising and falling like it was breathing. He swore he heard another voice answer her, not human, not kind, and not of this world. The slaves began to avoid the cypress after that. Even the bravest among them refused to work near that patch of land. The overseer mocked them, called them fools, until one morning his dog ran into the field and never came back. They found it hours later, lying at the roots of the cypress, its body untouched, but its eyes blackened, as though it had seen something that stopped its heart. After that, even the overseer started carrying a Bible in his pocket. Ruth never spoke of what happened, but her face told its own story. The hollowness in her cheeks, the strange calm that came over her when the others prayed, the way she would smile faintly when thunder rolled in the distance. It was as if she was waiting for the storm to speak again. Dinah, the midwife, was the only one who dared confront her. One morning before sunrise, she found Ruth kneeling in the fields, her hands covered in soil, her lips moving in that same ancient rhythm. Dinah called her name, but Ruth didn't look up. The old woman touched her shoulder, and Ruth turned with eyes that didn't seem her own. Dinah saw symbols etched into the dirt in front of her, crude shapes and markings drawn with a stick, surrounded by bits of broken bone and small tufts of cotton soaked in something dark. Ruth's voice was steady when she finally spoke. She said she had made a promise, and the field had listened. She said the baby had been claimed but not taken, that there was balance in what had been done. Dinah fled before hearing more, clutching her rosary so tight her fingers bled. She told no one what Ruth had said, but her hair turned grey within a week. From that night onward, strange things began to happen on the plantation. The cotton near the cypress grew unnaturally fast, blooming out of season, and when picked, it left a faint red stain on the workers' hands that wouldn't wash off. The air in that section of the field always felt heavier, thicker, as though something unseen watched from beneath the soil. Those who worked near it began to dream of the same thing. A baby's cry in the distance, followed by the sound of chains dragging through water. Some woke to find their feet muddy, though they swore they hadn't left their cabins. The overseer grew more violent, more desperate to keep order, but even he could not stand the silence that hung over the fields. At night, the plantation dogs whimpered and hid, and the lamps flickered though there was no wind. One afternoon, as the sun burned red over the horizon, Ruth returned to the cypress with a group of women. They didn't speak. They followed her as if compelled by something beyond fear or reason. She carried a bundle in her arms, not a baby this time, but a small clay bowl filled with something that steamed in the heat. She set it at the base of the tree, knelt, and began to hum. The others joined her, their voices trembling, forming a low, haunting sound that filled the air with dread. The ground shivered, faintly at first, then stronger, as if something beneath was shifting. When it stopped, the air seemed to crackle with energy, and a strange calm fell over them. Ruth rose, her face wet with tears, and turned to the women. She said nothing, but they understood. They scattered, running back to the quarters without looking behind them. That night, the master's wife woke, screaming. She claimed she heard a baby crying outside her window, though her husband found nothing there. The next morning, every cotton stalk within 20 feet of the cypress was bent low, as though crushed by invisible hands. Ruth was nowhere to be found. Her cabin was empty, her few belongings left behind, and the soil near the tree bore fresh footprints, one large, one small. Jonah said she had fulfilled her side of the pact, that whatever she had promised in the storm had been paid in full. The others said the baby had called her back. The overseer ordered the area fenced off, but no one dared touch it. Even the master, proud and cruel, avoided that corner of his land. The story spread quietly, carried in whispers from one plantation to another. They called it the Pact of the Cotton Fields, the night when a mother's grief met something darker than God or man. Some said Ruth's spirit still walked the rows, carrying her baby, singing to the soil that had claimed her. Others said the field itself had become alive, listening, waiting for another desperate soul to make the same kind of promise when the thunder rolled and the air tasted of iron. The overseer of the plantation, Thomas Brigg, was a man known for his cruelty, his voice like the crack of the whip he carried at his side, and his eyes always searching for weakness. He believed fear kept the fields alive, that pain was the only way to keep order among those he called property. But after the birth of Ruth's child, his voice began to tremble. The first time it happened, it was subtle, a stutter that broke through his command. He was shouting at a boy who had dropped his basket, the words cutting sharp through the humid air, when suddenly his gaze shifted to the far end of the field. There, beyond the cotton, he saw something small move between the rows. Too quick, too low to the ground. He thought it was a child, but when he went closer, nothing was there. Only the sound of the wind sighing through the cotton and the faint echo of a cry that seemed to come from the earth itself. He told himself it was the wind, just the wind. But when he turned to leave, he felt it, a soft breath against the back of his neck, warm and wet, like a baby's exhale. He swung his whip behind him, but nothing was there, only silence and the rustle of leaves. That night he could not sleep. The sound of crying drifted into his quarters, faint at first, then growing louder until it filled the room. He stormed outside, lantern in hand, shouting curses into the dark, demanding whoever was out there to show themselves. The sound stopped all at once, as if swallowed by the night. When he turned back toward the cabin, the door was open, though he swore he had latched it. Inside, the cradle in the corner, meant for the master's newborn child, was rocking slowly on its own. He threw the lantern at it, the glass shattering and the fire catching on the floorboards. The flames spread quickly, but when others came running, the cradle was untouched, sitting perfectly still in the corner, as if nothing had happened at all. From that night forward, the overseer avoided the cypress tree, though he would never admit it aloud. He walked around that part of the field, his steps quick, his eyes darting toward the horizon. The slaves noticed. They whispered among themselves, calling him cursed, saying the baby spirit had marked him. His temper worsened, and his hands shook when he reached for his whip. He claimed Ruth was behind it, that she had bewitched him, poisoned his dreams. He wanted to have her whipped, to make an example of her, but every time he raised the idea, something stopped him. His words caught in his throat, his chest tightened, and sweat poured down his face. The master, seeing his condition, ordered him to rest, but rest only made things worse. In his sleep, the cries grew clearer. Sometimes he heard laughter, the sound of a child playing just beyond sight. He dreamed of the cotton fields stretching endlessly, and in the center the cypress tree, its roots coiled like black veins into the ground. Beneath it, something moved, shifting, breathing. In the dream, Ruth stood there, her dress soaked with rain, the baby in her arms. She would raise her head slowly, her eyes pale as ash, and say his name. Each time he woke, his mouth was full of the taste of dirt and iron. One morning he found footprints outside his window, small, impossibly small, pressed deep into the mud. They led toward the fields but disappeared halfway, as though the earth had swallowed them. He started drinking more, unable to face the quiet without a bottle in his hand. The others began to notice his decline. His hair thinned, his face grew hollow, and the fire in his eyes dimmed to a flicker. He spoke less and muttered often, talking to himself about things unseen. He claimed he could hear the baby crying during the day now, between the rows of cotton, hidden beneath the hum of cicadas. Sometimes he would stop in the middle of the field, cock his head and whisper, "Do you hear it?" The workers would lower their eyes and keep moving, pretending not to notice. Then came the day he tried to dig. No one knew what had driven him to it, but he brought a shovel to the base of the cypress tree and began tearing at the soil with manic desperation. The slaves watched from afar, whispering prayers. He dug until his hands bled, until the ground turned dark and wet beneath him. When the master found him hours later, he was sitting in the mud, cradling something invisible in his arms. His eyes were wide, and he was rocking back and forth, humming a lullaby none of them recognized. When they tried to pull him away, he screamed that the baby was cold, that it needed warmth. He was dragged back to his quarters, and for days he lay feverish, muttering about a promise he had broken. After that, the fields seemed to change again. The cotton nearest the tree began to rot from the inside, turning black and brittle. The workers said they could smell death in the air when they passed. The overseer refused to return to his post, locking himself away, jumping at every creak and whisper. The master sent a preacher to bless the grounds, but the man left before sundown, pale and trembling, refusing to speak of what he had felt when he stood near the tree. The next night, the overseer's door was found open. His bed was empty, his boots still beside it, and the candle on his table burned down to nothing. They searched the property until morning. It was one of the slaves who found him, or what was left of him, lying at the base of the cypress, his face turned upward, eyes open, mouth stretched in a silent scream. There was no blood, no sign of struggle, but the skin around his neck was blackened, as if something small had wrapped itself tightly around his throat. The master ordered the body buried far from the fields, but the slaves refused to touch it. They said the ground would not take him, that the pact Ruth had made had claimed another life. So they left him there, beneath the shadow of the cypress, the same place where Ruth had given birth. That night, as the wind swept through the rows, those still awake heard the soft, distant sound of a baby's cry. Only this time, it was followed by a man's voice, weeping quietly in the dark. After the overseer's death, a strange hush fell over the plantation, a silence so deep it seemed to press against the skin. The master told himself it was coincidence, that the man had been weak in the mind, but even he began to walk a little quicker when passing the cotton fields. The slaves moved slower, their eyes darting toward the cypress tree that stood like a sentinel in the distance, its bark dark as coal, its branches always shifting though no wind touched them. They knew something had been disturbed that could not be undone, something that had tasted the living and found a way to remain. Ruth had not spoken since that night, but her silence now carried a weight that made the others avoid her path. She wandered between the rows with her head bowed, her dress dragging in the dirt, her bare feet leaving faint prints that seemed to sink too deep into the soil. Then one morning, she was gone. No one had seen her leave, no footsteps, no trail, no sound. Her cabin stood empty, the door wide open, the single candle inside still burning, though it should have died long before dawn. On her bed lay the strip of cloth she had once used to wrap her baby, the fabric stiff with time and faintly damp, as if someone had just held it. The air smelled of rain, though the sky was clear. Dinah, who had always feared the worst, said Ruth had gone to keep her promise, that the child was calling for her from the place beneath the cypress. Some of the younger slaves went looking, though every step toward that tree made their hearts pound harder. They found nothing but the marks of small hands in the dirt, pressed into the soil as if a child had been crawling toward the tree and vanished halfway there. After that, strange things began to happen again. The nights grew colder, the shadows thicker, and the air carried a sound that was neither wind nor insect. The women said they could hear a lullaby drifting through the fields, a soft tune with no words, one that made their skin crawl and their eyes water. The men tried to ignore it at first, but one by one they began to lose sleep. They said the crying had returned, faint at first, then louder, as if moving closer each night. Some said it came from the fields, others swore it came from beneath the floorboards of their cabins. The master's wife woke screaming one night, claiming she had seen a woman standing in the yard holding a baby with hollow eyes. When her husband went to check, there were no footprints in the mud, only the faint scent of rain on the air again. The following week, a new overseer arrived, a young man named Caleb Price, eager to prove himself, full of the arrogance of someone who thought fear was for fools. The workers watched him carefully, waiting for the land to teach him the same lesson it had taught the last man. At first, he laughed at the stories, calling them the nonsense of tired minds, but within days, the laughter stopped. He began to complain that the nights were too quiet, that he could feel something watching him when he walked the fields after sundown. He ordered the slaves to work near the cypress tree, to show them he was not afraid, but by midday, the heat around the tree grew unbearable, the air thick with a smell like rot and iron. The cotton in that patch refused to be picked. Every time someone reached for it, their hands came away sticky, stained, dark red, and their fingers burned as if scalded. One of the men, a tall field hand named Isaac, said he saw something moving in the shadows between the rows. He swore it was small, crawling low, and that its hands dragged across the ground, leaving trails in the dust. When he told the others, they refused to return to that part of the field, no matter the punishment. The new overseer beat Isaac for spreading fear, but that night, Isaac disappeared. They found his hat at the edge of the cypress grove, but no trace of him anywhere else. The next morning, the soil where he had vanished was turned up, as if freshly dug, and the cotton there grew taller overnight, whiter and thicker than before. Caleb tried to burn it, thinking it was cursed, but the flames died before touching it, as though smothered by unseen hands. Ruth's name began to be whispered again, not as it had been before, but now with reverence and fear, as though she had become something not of flesh but of the earth itself. The old one said she had gone into the ground to be with her child, that her soul had bound itself to the land, and that the cypress tree marked the place of her eternal keeping. When the moon was full, they said her figure could be seen walking through the mist, her arms cradling something swaddled in cloth, her face pale as moonlight. Those who saw her never spoke again. The preacher who came to cleanse the fields lasted less than an hour before leaving, his cross shaking in his hand, sweat dripping from his face, though the night was cold. He muttered about voices in the dirt, about something beneath the roots whispering his name. By the end of the season, the plantation's yield had fallen to almost nothing. The master blamed the weather, the slaves, anything but the truth. He moved his family to another part of the property, far from the cypress, and forbade anyone to go near it. But the crying did not stop. Even from the big house, they could hear it sometimes, soft, mournful and distant, like a baby calling for its mother from a place beyond reach. The dogs refused to go outside after dark, and the horses grew restless, eyes rolling white whenever thunder rolled in the distance. One evening, Caleb Price gathered what courage he had left and rode toward the cypress, determined to prove once and for all that the stories were lies. The slaves watched from their cabins, praying silently as he dismounted and stood before the tree. The sky was cloudless, yet the wind rose around him, cold and sharp, carrying with it a faint sound, a lullaby. He looked up, his lantern trembling in his hand, and saw the branches swaying though the air was still. The ground beneath him shifted and he stumbled back. From the soil, a small hand emerged, pale and wet, its fingers curling toward him. He screamed and dropped the lantern, the light flickering across the field, and in that brief moment before the flame died, those watching swore they saw Ruth standing behind him, her eyes hollow, her child pressed to her chest, both bathed in a faint silver glow. When the light went out, there was silence. The next morning, Caleb's horse returned alone, its saddle torn, its eyes wild with terror. At the base of the cypress, a new patch of cotton had sprouted overnight, bright white and perfect, glistening in the dawn light, as if fed by something other than rain. Years passed, but the memory of Ruth, her child, and the pact whispered to have been sealed beneath the cypress never truly faded. The plantation changed owners twice, yet the curse seemed to remain in the soil, refusing to be buried. The new master, a man named Samuel Hargrove, dismissed the stories as superstition when he first arrived. He laughed when the elders warned him not to plow too deep near the old tree, saying the dead had no power over the living. He brought new workers, men and women who had never heard of Ruth, and ordered them to clear the overgrown fields where no one had dared to tread in years. But within days, even those who came with no fear in their hearts began to whisper of strange things. They said the ground moved beneath their feet, soft and breathing like something alive. They said they heard the cry of a child beneath the sound of their own tools, faint but constant, like the land itself was mourning. Hargrove tried to rationalize it. He blamed the talk on exhaustion, on the power of rumor spreading among simple minds, but then the animals began to act strange. The oxen refused to move past the cypress grove. Chickens laid eggs streaked with a thin line of blood. The horses would not drink from the water barrels near the fields, snorting and pulling away with their eyes rolling white. When night fell, the workers swore they could hear a woman's hum moving through the rows, a tune that rose and fell with the wind, familiar to those who had heard it before, the same lullaby Ruth once sang to her child. One night, Samuel's wife, Lillian, claimed she saw someone standing outside their window. The figure was that of a woman, tall and thin, holding a small bundle in her arms. She said the woman's face was pale and wet, and her mouth never moved, though Lillian heard her voice clearly inside her head. It said only one word: return. Samuel checked the yard, finding only the soft prints of bare feet in the mud, small ones beside them like those of a child. The next morning, the prints were gone, washed away by dew, though there had been no rain. That day, one of the youngest workers fell ill after picking cotton from the forbidden patch near the cypress. His hands blistered, his skin turned grey, and he whispered nonsense until his final breath. Before dying, he kept asking to be buried beneath the tree, saying the woman was waiting there. They buried him elsewhere, but by the next sunrise, his grave had sunk, as if something below had pulled him down. The plantation began to rot from the inside. Crops failed in the richest soil, the wells turned cloudy, and the nights grew unnaturally cold. Hargrove's overseer tried to keep order, but men began to flee under the cover of darkness, unwilling to face the unseen presence that seemed to follow them in their dreams. Those who stayed said they woke to the sound of footsteps in their cabins, small and light, like a child wandering between the beds. Sometimes they would feel a hand brush their arm, soft and cold, or a faint tug at the blanket, followed by a sigh that vanished into the dark. More than once they found the shape of tiny handprints on the inside of the windows, as though something had been watching from the other side of the glass. Samuel finally sent for a priest from Little Rock, a man named Father Ellis, known for his boldness against superstition. The priest arrived full of confidence, scoffing at the warnings. He carried holy water, crosses, and scriptures, believing faith alone could cleanse whatever evil haunted the land. But when he stepped beneath the cypress tree, his words faltered. He said the air felt thick, like breathing through smoke. He sprinkled holy water on the roots, and where it touched, the bark hissed. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest, gasping that there were voices under the ground, whispering to him. The others dragged him away, and he left before sundown, refusing to return. Before leaving, he warned Samuel that the tree was not cursed by any devil he knew. It was bound by something older, something born from suffering too deep to be erased. The fields lay abandoned again after that. Nature began reclaiming what the living had forsaken. Vines crawled over the cabins, and the once white cotton rows turned brown with decay. Only the patch beneath the cypress still bloomed, its stalks impossibly tall, the cotton unnaturally bright, untouched by rot or insects. Sometimes at dusk, a faint light could be seen glowing between the rows. Not fire, not lanterns, but something soft and shifting, like the reflection of moonlight on water. Those who saw it said it moved with purpose, as if pacing, as if watching. Decades later, when the war came and the land changed hands again, soldiers camped near the ruins of the plantation. They knew nothing of its past, nothing of Ruth or the child or the overseers who had vanished. On their second night, one of the men went missing. They found his rifle near the cypress, but not his body. In the mud, there were two sets of footprints, one large, one small, leading into the grove and stopping abruptly. The men dug where the trail ended, and the soil beneath was warm, though the air was cold. They stopped digging when one of them swore he heard a heartbeat echoing faintly from the ground. The commanding officer ordered them to leave the area, and they packed up before dawn. But as they rode away, they heard the sound of a baby crying behind them, distant but clear, carrying through the morning fog. Years rolled into decades, the plantation long forgotten, reclaimed by the wild. Travelers passing through the overgrown land still speak of the tree that never dies, the cotton that glows at night, and the lullaby that drifts through the air when the wind is still. Some say the tree feeds on memory, that every cry, every whisper of the enslaved still lingers in its roots. Others believe Ruth's spirit remains bound to the soil, still holding her child, still keeping the pact that no one fully understood. They say that on nights when lightning splits the sky and rain strikes the earth like chains, a woman's voice can be heard rising from the field, calling softly through the dark, and beneath it, the faint cry of a baby that was never meant to leave the earth.